The sound of the landline ringing at 4:27 a.m. broke the silence of the house, as if tearing a veil that Carter had spent years sewing with silence. That phone hadn't rung in months, perhaps years. There in the dry heart of Arizona, surrounded by horses, cacti, and vast distances, he had found a strange kind of peace. Not a happy peace, but a hardened peace, like an exile he had imposed on himself after his breakdown.
He woke up early. He fed the horses. He cleaned the stables. He spent the rest of the day drawing maps that served no purpose. Fictional continents, imaginary coastlines, oceans that danced between worlds. It was his way of controlling the madness, of keeping his mind occupied so that the memories wouldn't overflow.
When he answered the phone, he felt his fingers tremble. The voice on the other end did not identify itself, but Carter recognized it immediately. It was the same voice that had handed him his discharge from the Navy a decade earlier, with downcast eyes and few words. "You're too good to continue, and too dangerous to ignore."
We found a structure at the same coordinates you mapped by hand 10 years ago, and it shouldn't be there. Carter didn't respond. The silence between them was like a narrow corridor. The voice continued. "We don't have photos. We have corrupted satellite images, impossible readings. Sentinel-7 picked up something during a geomagnetic storm. A tower, cylindrical, metallic, 300 meters high. It casts no shadow. It doesn't reflect radar. It doesn't officially exist."
Carter took a deep breath. The sound of his own inhalation seemed too heavy for the thin air in the room. "You're the only living person who has ever hand-drawn a map of that region. The only one who came back. We need you to go again." The call dropped, or was disconnected. He stood there, phone in hand, staring into nothingness.
Then he walked slowly to the living room wall and stared at the old framed map. He had made it himself. The paper was yellowed, the edges wavy, and the signature in the lower corner still visible despite the dust. The island. The same island. It was there!
The journey to the island was unusual. Nothing about it was simple. Carter boarded an unmarked military plane, taking off from a base that did not appear in any records. During the flight, he received a sealed dossier. He did not open it. Upon landing in Russian territory, he was transported by train to an underground station. Most of the journey was made in silence, accompanied only by soldiers, too young to know who he was. Or perhaps they knew, but were afraid to ask.
As they approached the coordinates, the systems began to fail. The digital navigator flashed, then went blank. The GPS fell silent. The compass began to spin, like a child playing with the pendulum of fate. The radio crackled, then hissed, and finally fell into an oppressive silence. And then it appeared. The island. Small, like a scar in the middle of the ice. Black, made of volcanic rock. Petrified trees bent, as if they had been frozen in the act of asking for forgiveness. The ground seemed to pulsate with a silent energy. And in the center, piercing the sky like a needle inserted into the fabric of reality, stood the tower. Cylindrical, metallic, impossible. It floated a few inches above the ground. There was no base, no foundation. Nothing supported it. The light did not reflect. There was no shadow. The air around it seemed thicker, as if time had slowed down. Carter got out of the helicopter. Each step was a challenge. The ground seemed to recognize his weight. There was no sound, no birds, no wind, just the tower.
Carter spent the next 3 days exploring the island with analog equipment. He measured distances with a tape measure. He wore a wind-up watch. He drew new maps with a black pencil. But something was wrong.
Distances changed. The tree he had marked the day before had disappeared. A rocky outcrop was now a shallow lake. The sky changed color at random times, and even the sound of his own footsteps seemed to have echoes that did not come from his footsteps. On the morning of the 4th day, he found footprints, several of them, human footprints. Some were recent, others were almost fossilized. Some were large, others were small. Some were made by Soviet boots, others were barefoot.
He followed the footprints to a campsite, a mixture of decades. Canvas tents from the 1970s, modern backpacks, scientific instruments from the 1950s. A radio transmitted static. A Super 8 camera shook on its own on a tripod. And then he saw someone. At the top of a rocky hill, a human figure, with his back turned. Carter climbed slowly, feeling every muscle contract in the cold. When he reached the top, the figure turned around. It was him.
Older, younger, with deeper eyes, a calmer expression, but the same face. The same scar on his left eyebrow, the same Carter. The tower won't let you in unless it's already inside you. Carter wanted to run away, but he couldn't. Others began to appear. A man in a NASA uniform, a woman from the UN with a blank stare, a Soviet soldier holding a dried flower. They were all there, lost, trapped, mapped.
On the night of the 5th day, Carter walked to the tower. The ground vibrated like a drum played by invisible hands. He knew it would be his last walk. The tower looked different. It glowed in hues that did not belong to this world, colors that had no name, shapes that had no outline. It was like seeing the memory of a color before birth.
He reached out his hand and disappeared. When he opened his eyes, there was no floor. There was no air. There was space, white, infinite, and silence. A deep, absolute silence, thicker than emptiness.
Maps floated around him, thousands, millions, some drawn by hand, others formed by pure thought. They were maps of possible places, impossible places, future places, and forgotten places. Maps of feelings, maps of memories, maps of lives. At the center of it all, a single map with his signature, incomplete. He understood. He was the map.
The tower absorbed him. His voice echoed in disconnected fragments. He heard phrases he had said as a child, words spoken in nightmares, whispers from the past. The tower did not observe. It archived. "We are not mapping the world," Carter said. "The world is mapping us."
He tried to go back, but there was no return. There was no way out. The tower was made of consciousness, and he was now part of it. The next day, a helicopter returned to the island. There was no one there, just a tape recorder with a message on loop. If a place calls you, it's because you left something there.
There are places inside us that, even when buried, continue to send out signals. Emotional places, unresolved traumas, ideas we try to forget. But the map of our life is not complete without them. Carter didn't come back to redeem himself. He came back because he understood that no one finds themselves without first getting completely lost. And if today you feel lost, Maybe it's because you're closer to your true starting point than you've ever been. Going back is not regressing.
If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something you haven't felt in a long time, then don't let it fade into the silence. Leave a like, because every click tells us we're not alone in the void. Subscribe, because there are still many coordinates left to uncover, and the next one might just rewrite everything you think you know. This is Lost Coordinates, and some maps only appear to those who are ready. We'll see you in the next transmission.